You are standing in a grand, echoing hall in a foreign land. The man on the throne before you wields absolute power over life and death. You and your family are starving, terrified, and guilty of a betrayal that has haunted you for decades. And then the room clears. The powerful ruler begins to weep so loudly the walls shake. He looks at you and says, "I am the brother you sold into slavery. Do not be angry with yourselves. God sent me before you to preserve life." In an instant, decades of guilt, terror, and suffering are flipped upside down by a single shattering realization. What was meant for evil was being masterfully woven into something profoundly good.
Wow.
Yeah. Welcome, everyone, to today's deep dive. We're absolutely thrilled to have you with us because today we are embarking on a massive, comprehensive exploration of the book of Genesis.
A really big one today.
Huge. For our journey today, we're using the original text of the King James Version alongside two incredibly rich theological commentary scripts that really help illuminate the text. Our mission is to take this foundational literature, break through the archaic language, and bring its sweeping history and profound truth right to you.
It's wonderful to dive into this with you. You know, the word Genesis, it literally translates to beginning.
Right.
And that is exactly what this text is. It's the seed plot of all existence. If we don't understand Genesis, we will inevitably struggle to understand the rest of the scriptures.
Because it sets up everything.
Everything. It establishes the theological foundation for everything that follows. The dawn of creation, the tragedy of the fall, the very first whispers of redemption, and the unbreakable nature of divine covenants. It gives us the absolute origins of humanity, sin, and grace.
Okay, let's unpack this, because reading Genesis isn't just some dry ancient history lesson. It's incredibly relevant. Genesis is a mirror. It's reflecting who you are, who God is, and exactly why the world operates the way it does today.
It really is.
It shows us human nature in all its messy, brilliant, broken reality. So let's start at the absolute beginning. Genesis chapters 1 and 2. We see order coming from total chaos.
What's fascinating here is that the text makes absolutely no attempt to argue for God's existence.
Yeah, there's no preamble.
None. It doesn't open with a philosophical proof. It simply boldly declares it. The very first verse. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth.
Just boom, there it is.
Right. It paints a picture of an earth that was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And from that state of utter, formless chaos, God speaks.
The systematic nature of it is what gets me.
It's profound. God speaks, and chaos yields to order. He says, "Let there be light," and light divides from darkness. He divides the waters to create the firmament, separating the sky from the sea. He commands the dry land to appear, and life springs from the ground. Grass, herbs, fruit trees. It's a deeply intentional, majestic ordering of reality.
It's so systematic, almost architectural. The sun, moon, and stars are placed in the firmament. The whales and fowl are commanded to fill the waters in the sky. The beasts and cattle creep upon the earth. And then, and this is key, we reach the ultimate pinnacle of this creation narrative.
Yes.
God says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." I really want to emphasize this for you listening right now. The creation of humanity. Commentaries heavily emphasize this concept of the imago Dei, the image of God.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean for a person walking around today?
Well, it changes everything about how you view yourself and others. Being made in the Imago Dei means you are uniquely relational, you are moral, and you are entrusted with stewardship over this earth.
So is it just a poetic phrase?
Not at all. It means your life isn't an accident of cosmic chance. To bear the image of the Creator is to be entrusted with immense dignity. Human purpose isn't about self-invention or trying to arbitrarily manifest your own meaning. Your purpose is God-given. You are a reflection of the divine.
That is such a stark contrast to how modern society tells us to constantly, find ourselves. We're told to look inward, but Genesis says look upward. And then chapter 2 zooms in, providing this beautifully intimate detail of creation. God doesn't just speak humanity into existence from afar like the stars.
He gets his hands in the dirt.
Literally. He forms man from the dust of the ground and breathes into his nostrils the breath of life.
Which makes humanity this incredible, unique bridge between the physical and the spiritual. We are both earthly dust and divine breath. Furthermore, chapter 2 establishes foundational human institutions. We see the establishment of marriage, where man and woman become one flesh. We see the concept of work, as man is put into the Garden of Eden to dress it and keep it.
And I think this is crucial. Work was a holy calling given before sin ever entered the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Work is not part of the curse. It was originally part of paradise. And finally, we see the sanctification of the seventh day, a day of rest, blessed and set apart because the work of creation was finished and it was very good.
It's a picture of perfect, unbroken harmony. Man and woman are naked and unashamed, living in total fellowship with their Creator.
But that perfect harmony doesn't last long, does it?
It definitely doesn't. We turn the page to Genesis chapter 3, and here's where it gets really interesting. The entrance of the serpent. The text notes the serpent is more subtle than any beast of the field. And what strikes me is that his very first tactic isn't a full frontal assault.
No, it's insidious.
It's the quiet introduction of doubt. He asks the woman, "Yea, hath God said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden."
That phrasing is a masterclass in manipulation. The psychology of the fall is entirely rooted in this single moment. The serpent attacks God's goodness and the reliability of his word. Sin begins the precise moment trust in God is questioned.
He plants that seed of suspicion.
Exactly. The serpent tells the woman, "Ye shall not surely die," directly contradicting God, and he implies that God is actually holding out on them, that eating the fruit will open their eyes and make them as gods, knowing good and evil. He paints God not as a loving father, but as a cosmic killjoy, keeping them from their true potential.
And Eve looks at the tree. The text says she sees that the fruit is desirable for food, pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise. She takes it, eats, and gives it to Adam, who is right there with her.
Silently complying?
Yeah, Jasana. And he eats. The fallout is devastating, and it is instantaneous.
The innocence they enjoyed is entirely shattered, immediately replaced by shame. Their eyes are open, they realize they are naked, and they desperately try to cover themselves by sewing fig leaves together to make aprons.
Which is such a human reaction, right?
Yeah.
Trying to cover our own mess.
Right. And that perfect, unhindered fellowship is replaced by a terrifying fear. When they hear the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, they hide themselves amongst the trees. They are literally running from the very source of their life.
And then comes one of the most profound questions in all of literature. God calls unto Adam and says, "Where art thou?" Now, it's vital to understand that an omniscient, all-knowing God isn't asking this because he lost them behind a bush.
No, he doesn't lack geographic knowledge.
Roughly.
Precisely. This is a profound, sorrowful, almost therapeutic invitation to confession. God is asking Adam to realize where he is spiritually, to look at the vast, tragic chasm his disobedience has just created. Where are you, Adam? Look at what has happened to our relationship.
But instead of repentance, what do we see?
We see responsibility replaced entirely by blame.
So fast, too.
Instantly. Adam blames the woman and subtly blames God, saying, "The woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree." Translation, it's her fault, and really it's your fault for putting her here. And the woman immediately blames the serpent, saying, "The serpent beguiled me."
The blame game starts immediately. It's human nature 101. But right in the middle of these curses, the curse upon the serpent, the woman's sorrow in conception, the cursing of the ground with thorns and thistles, we see something breathtaking.
The proto-evangelium.
Yes. To translate that theology term for everyone, proto means first, and evangelium means gospel or good news. So the first gospel. In Genesis 3:1 Fian, God is speaking to the serpent and gives the first promise of redemption right amidst the judgment. He says, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel."
It is the very first whisper of a coming Savior in the entire Bible. The seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent, a fatal final blow to evil itself, though the Savior will suffer a bruised heel in the process. He will be wounded, but victorious.
Such a powerful image.
And this verbal promise of grace is immediately followed by a physical act of grace. God doesn't leave Adam and Eve in their inadequate, scratchy, self-made fig leaf aprons. Unto Adam and his wife, the Lord God makes coats of skins and clothes them.
Which means something had to die.
Exactly. Innocent blood is shed. An animal loses its life to provide a physical covering for their shame. This establishes a deeply theological pattern of sacrifice and grace that sets the stage for the rest of human history. Man tries to cover his own sin with fig leaves, human effort, but God himself must provide the true, lasting covering through sacrifice.
And that reality pushes us out of the garden and into a world that deteriorates incredibly fast. We jump into Genesis 4 with the story of the first murder. Adam and Eve have two sons, Cain and Abel. In process of time, they both bring offerings to the Lord. Abel brings the firstlings of his flock, and Cain brings the fruit of the ground. God has respect unto Abel and his offering, but he does not respect Cain's offering. Cain is curious. His countenance falls.
But here we see God extending mercy to Cain, even in the form of a warning. He asks Cain why he is so angry, and tells him, "If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted, and if thou dost not well, sin lieth at the door."
Sin lieth at the door.
It is a stark, chilling personification of sin. It is crouching at the door like a predatory animal waiting to master him, but God tells him he must rule over it. God is telling Cain, you have a choice here.
But Cain, tragically, rejects this warning. He talks with his brother in the field, rises up against him, and murders him in cold blood. And when God asks Cain where his brother is, Cain's defiant, timeless response echoes through the ages. "I know not. Am I my brother's keeper?"
The absolute callousness of that statement.
It's the ultimate expression of the severed relational bond that began in Eden. We've gone from hiding from God to openly mocking him while standing over a brother's dead body.
And the violence just spreads like a virus through Cain's family line. By the time we get down to his descendant Lamech, the culture has entirely degraded. Lamech takes multiple wives, the first recorded polygamy, and he openly boasts about murder to them. He says he slew a young man just for hurting him, bragging that if Cain is avenged sevenfold, Lamech will be avenged 70 and sevenfold.
It's a culture of toxic pride, disproportionate vengeance, and total disregard for human life.
But there's a contrast, right? At the end of Genesis 4, Eve has another son, Seth. And through Seth's line, we read that then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. So we see this tiny, fragile preservation of hope running parallel to the massive spread of darkness.
Little thread of light.
Yes, but the dark soon becomes overwhelming. As we transition into Genesis chapter 6 through 9, we reach the narrative of the flood. The text details the utter systemic corruption of humanity. It says, God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually.
Only evil continually.
Think about the sheer weight of that phrasing. Every imagination. Only evil. Continually. The human heart had become a factory of relentless malice. The text tells us that it repented the Lord that he had made man, and it grieved him at his heart. The earth was filled with violence. God decrees a judgment to destroy all flesh.
But right there, amidst the heavy darkness of this impending global judgment, there's a crucial pivot in the text. Genesis 6:8 says, "But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord." I want to point this out because it's so important for you to realize. Grace precedes salvation. Noah didn't earn his way out of the flood by being completely flawless. The text specifically says he found grace.
Exactly.
God commands Noah to build an ark of gopher wood, and the dimensions are incredibly specific. 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. He's to bring his family and two of every sort of living thing, male and female, into this massive vessel of refuge.
The mechanics of the ark are fascinating, as it represents a tangible manifestation of God's salvation through judgment. The floodwaters come, the fountains of the great deep are broken up, and the windows of heaven are opened for 40 days and 40 nights. Every living substance on the face of the ground is destroyed. The waters prevail for 150 days.
An unimaginable cataclysm.
But the ark alone is preserved, bearing up above the chaos, sheltering the seed of future humanity and animal life. When the waters finally begin to recede, we see Noah testing the atmosphere, sending forth a raven and then a dove. The dove eventually returns with an olive leaf plucked off, signaling that the waters had abated and the earth was healing.
When they finally step off the ark onto dry ground, the very first thing Noah does is build an altar to the Lord and offer burnt offerings. And God smells the sweet savor and makes a profound covenant. He promises never again to curse the ground for man's sake or destroy every living thing with a flood. And he gives a physical token of this perpetual promise. He puts his bow in the cloud, a rainbow. Every time it rains, God is promising, I will remember my covenant.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, humanity is given a fresh start, a washed earth. But the human heart, the internal reality of mankind, is still fundamentally flawed. The flood washed the earth, but it couldn't wash the human heart.
And we see that so quickly.
We do. This becomes glaringly apparent in Genesis chapter 11, the story of the Tower of Babel. Humanity journeys to the plain of Shinar. Now remember, God had commanded them to spread out and replenish the earth.
Instead, they centralize.
They unite with a singular language and a proud, unified goal. They say, "Go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth."
They had brick for stone and slime for mortar, and they were building a massive monument to themselves. Let us make us a name. That phrase is so incredibly telling. It feels very modern, honestly.
It is the theological crux of the passage. This unity was absolutely not for the worship of God. It was entirely for self-glorification. They wanted to reach heaven on their own terms, through their own technological achievement, their own bricks and slime, and their collective pride.
So what does God do?
God looks at this unified rebellion and confounds their language, ensuring they cannot understand one another's speech, and scatters them across the earth. It is a definitive proof that human effort, no matter how unified or technologically advanced, cannot construct a stairway to heaven. True significance cannot be built from the ground up.
Think about this for a second and apply it to your own life today. Think about our modern babbles. We are so often obsessed with building our careers, crafting our legacies, cultivating our reputations online, all to make a name for ourselves. It's like modern tech hubris or social media legacy building. We try to build these towers of success to secure our own worth and prevent ourselves from feeling scattered or insignificant.
We're terrified of being unknown.
Exactly. Yet Babel reminds us so powerfully that true significance, true identity, comes only from God's calling, not our own frantic striving.
Which is exactly where the narrative takes us next. Because right after the scattering of the nations at Babel, God changes his methodology. We see a massive narrative shift in chapters 12 and 15. God stops dealing with the nations en masse. The lens zooms way in. Instead of looking at humanity as a whole, he zeroes in on one specific man living in Ur of the Chaldees, Abram.
This is a huge pivot, and the call of Abram is radical. God tells him, "Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee." Let me stop you right there. No map provided, no clear itinerary, just a command to leave everything familiar, leave your entire support system, and step into the absolute unknown, armed with nothing but a promise.
A staggering amount of faith required.
God promises to make of him a great nation, to make his name great, and crucially, in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Through this one man's obedience, a global blessing is set in motion.
We dive much deeper into the mechanics of this in Genesis 15. Abram is struggling because, despite the promise, he remains childless. He asks God how this promise of a great nation will possibly come to pass when his only heir is the steward of his house, Eliezer of Damascus. God brings him outside, tells him to look toward heaven and tell the stars, if he is able to number them, "So shall thy seed be."
And then comes the verse.
Yes, one of the most foundational verses in all of Scripture. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. The theological concept of justification by faith is established right here, thousands of years before the New Testament.
But God goes even further to solidify this unconditional covenant. He tells Abram to bring a heifer, a she-goat, a ram, a turtle dove, and a pigeon, and to divide the animals right down the middle. This sounds totally bizarre and kind of graphic to modern ears, but this was a standard ancient Near Eastern covenant ritual. You cut the animals in half, lay them out, and both parties walk between the pieces, essentially taking a blood oath saying, "May what happened to these animals happen to me if I break my side of this covenant."
Exactly. But here is the magnificent twist. A deep sleep and a horror of great darkness falls upon Abram. He is immobilized. And when the sun goes down, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp representing the presence of God himself pass between those severed pieces alone.
Abram doesn't walk through.
He doesn't walk through. It is a unilateral, unconditional promise. God is essentially signing the contract for both of them. He is binding himself to fulfill the promise, entirely dependent on his own faithfulness, taking the penalty upon himself if it fails. It does not rely on Abram's perfection.
Wait, hold on. It's a good thing it doesn't rely on Abram's perfection, because in the very next breath, we see him fail spectacularly. This is the father of faith, and yet in Genesis 16 and 20, we see the glaring flaws of a patriarch. Out of a deep-seated fear for his own life, Abram lies about his wife Sarai, claiming she is just his sister. And he does this not once, but twice.
Once in Egypt and again in Gerar.
First in Egypt with Pharaoh, and later with Abimelech in Gerar. He is using his wife as a human shield. How does the text justify that? He is actively risking the safety of his wife and the very lineage of the promised seed, all for self-preservation.
The beauty of the biblical text is that it doesn't try to justify it. It doesn't hide the flaws of its heroes. It presents them in all their raw, embarrassing humanity. Abram acts out of cowardice, and it doesn't stop there. We see the profound impatience of both Abram and Sarai. They wait a decade for a child and still nothing, so they decide they need to help God out. They take matters into their own hands. Sarai gives her Egyptian handmaid, Hagar, to Abram as a surrogate.
Which is a disaster waiting to happen.
Oh, Hagar conceives, which immediately, predictably, leads to bitter domestic strife. Sarai deals hardly with Hagar, essentially abusing her until Hagar flees into the wilderness.
And out there in the desert, alone, pregnant and desperate, The angel of the Lord finds her by a fountain of water. He promises to multiply her seed through her son, Ishmael. And Hagar, this Egyptian slave who has been cast aside by the patriarch, gives God a beautiful name, El Roi. Thou God seest me. She says, have I also here looked after him that seeth me?
It is a breathtaking moment of pastoral tenderness from God to an outcast. And if we connect this to you, the listener, and your own life, if you ever look at your past and feel utterly disqualified by your failures, your fears, your moments of impatience where you tried to force an outcome instead of trusting God, take heart. The heroes of Genesis are profoundly, messily flawed, yet God's covenant depends entirely on his unfailing faithfulness, not Abraham's perfection, and certainly not yours. God sees you just as he saw Hagar in the wilderness, and he continually works through broken people.
Which brings us to the ultimate heartbreaking test of that faith in Genesis 22. Abraham is now a very old man. After 25 agonizing years of waiting, the promised son Isaac is finally born to Sarah. His name means laughter, and laughter finally fills their tent. But then the unthinkable happens. God tests Abraham. He says, take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of.
The psychological weight of this command is almost unbearable to imagine. All of God's promises, the great nation, the global blessing, the lineage, are bound up entirely in the life of this one miracle boy. Yet Abraham rises up early in the morning.
Can we just pause and think about the sheer psychological torture of the journey that follows? It's a 3-day walk, 3 days of silence, walking next to the son you know you've been asked to sacrifice. Every step must have been agonizing. They get to the mountain, and Isaac is carrying the wood for the burnt offering up the hill. As they walk, Isaac asks the question that must have pierced Abraham's heart like a sword. Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?
And Abraham's reply is so deeply prophetic, whether he fully realized it or not. My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering.
They reach the place. Abraham builds the altar, lays the wood, binds Isaac his son, and lays him on the altar. He stretches forth his hand and takes the knife to slay his son. The tension is at its absolute breaking point.
And at that exact final moment, the angel of the Lord calls to him out of heaven, Abraham, Abraham, lay not thine hand upon the lad, for now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. Abraham looks up, and there, behind him, is a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. He offers the ram in the stead of his son, and names the place Jehovah-Jireh, which translates to, the Lord will see to it, or the Lord will provide.
This raises an important question. Why did God orchestrate this incredibly dramatic, almost traumatic event?
It is because this moment is a profound theological shadow. It points definitively forward across history. The Christ-centered connection here is undeniable. This scene on Mount Moriah anticipates another father, another son, and another hill where the true ultimate substitute will be provided for humanity. God spared Abraham's son, but centuries later he would not spare his own son, allowing him to carry the wood of the cross up the hill to be the final, providing sacrifice.
So powerful. But as we move forward in the narrative, the dysfunction doesn't disappear. Let's look at the next generation with Isaac and his wife Rebekah. Like Sarah before her, Rebekah is initially barren. Isaac prays, she conceives, but the pregnancy is intensely difficult because the children are literally struggling together within her womb. God tells her that 2 nations are in her womb, and the elder shall serve the younger.
She gives birth to twins.
First out is Esau, red and hairy, who grows up to be a cunning hunter, a man of the field. Following right behind him is Jacob, physically holding onto his brother's heel. Jacob is described as a plain man, dwelling in tents, and his name literally means supplanter or deceiver. He's a grasper from birth.
And the generational dysfunction here is palpable. Isaac heavily favors Esau because he loves to eat of his hunted venison, but Rebekah heavily favors Jacob. This blatant parental favoritism sets the stage for a lifetime of betrayal. One day, Esau comes in from the field, absolutely faint from hunger. Jacob is boiling red pottage, essentially a thick lentil stew. Esau begs for it. Jacob, always the schemer, always looking for an angle, sees an opportunity and says, "Sell me this day thy birthright."
Which is huge.
Now, the birthright was incredibly significant. It was the right of the firstborn to inherit the spiritual leadership of the family and a double portion of the estate.
Right, and Esau, driven entirely by his immediate physical appetite, says, "Behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall this birthright do to me?" He swears the oath, eats the stew, and walks away. So what does this all mean? The text gives us the devastating summary. Thus Esau despised his birthright. It blows my mind that he traded a generational, eternal covenant for a bowl of soup.
It's unbelievable.
But when you're desperate, hungry, and short-sighted, The immediate physical need entirely eclipses the long-term spiritual reality.
It's a tragic trade. But the dysfunction reaches its absolute climax in Genesis 27. Isaac is now very old, his eyes are dim, and he thinks he is near death. He asks Esau to go hunt venison and make him savory meat so he can give him the patriarchal blessing before he dies. Rebekah overhears this and immediately hatches a grand deception with Jacob to steal the blessing.
This scene is like a tense thriller. Rebekah cooks the meat herself to mimic Esau's catch. She takes Esau's goodly raiment, his clothes that smell like the outdoors, and puts them on Jacob. And because Esau is a hairy man and Jacob is smooth, she literally ties the skins of young goats upon Jacob's hands and the smooth of his neck. So to his blind father's touch, he will feel like his hairy brother.
It's so elaborate.
Jacob brings the meat to Isaac and explicitly lies to his father's face, saying, "I am Esau, thy firstborn." Isaac is suspicious. He says, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." He feels the hairy hands. He smells the smell of the field on the clothes. He eats, drinks wine, and pronounces the irrevocable blessing of leadership, prosperity, and dominion over Jacob.
And Jacob is barely out of the room when Esau returns from his hunt with his own savory meat. Isaac trembles exceedingly when he realizes he has been entirely tricked. But in that culture, the spoken blessing carried absolute legal and spiritual weight. It cannot be unspoken. Esau cries out with a great and exceeding bitter cry. "Hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father." It is an agonizing, gut-wrenching scene of a fractured family. Esau weeps, vowing in his heart that as soon as the days of mourning for his father are over, he will murder his brother Jacob.
Which forces Jacob to flee for his life, with nothing but the clothes on his back. And this begins a fascinating phase of the deceiver being deceived. Jacob's mother sends him away hundreds of miles to her brother Laban in Padan Aram. On his journey, exhausted and alone, he uses a stone for a pillow and has a profound vision at Bethel. He dreams of a massive ladder set up on the earth, reaching all the way to heaven, with the angels of God ascending and descending on it. Above it stands the Lord, renewing the great covenant of land, seed, and blessing that he made with Abraham and Isaac, assuring Jacob, "I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest."
It's an incredible promise of grace to a man who just scammed his family. Jacob arrives in the east and meets Rachel, Laban's daughter, at a well. He is instantly smitten. He weeps, waters her flock, and eventually strikes a deal with his uncle Laban to serve 7 years of hard labor for Rachel's hand in marriage. The text beautifully notes that those 7 years seemed to him but a few days for the love he had to her. But on the wedding night, Laban orchestrates a massive deception of his own. In the dark of the tent, he gives Jacob, not Rachel, but her older, tender-eyed sister, Leah.
Wait, I have to jump in here. How do you not know who you are marrying? How did you wake up the next morning and go, "Oh no, it's Leah"?
It sounds absurd to us, but in the context of ancient Near Eastern wedding customs, the bride would be heavily veiled, and the consummation would take place in a completely dark tent. Laban exploits this perfectly. Jacob wakes up in the morning light, and behold, it is Leah. He furiously confronts Laban, asking why he has been beguiled, and Laban's response is dripping with irony. He says, "It must not be so done in our country, to give the younger before the firstborn."
Wow. Think of the poetic justice there. Jacob, the younger brother who exploited his father's blindness in the dark of the tent to steal the right of the firstborn, is now entirely exploited by his uncle in the dark of the tent, using the exact custom of the firstborn.
The deceiver gets deceived.
Exactly. Laban makes him work another 7 years for Rachel. This plunges the family into a painful, deeply toxic dynamic of competition. Leah is entirely unloved by Jacob, but God sees her affliction and makes her fruitful. She bears Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, desperately, tragically hoping with the birth of each son that she will finally win her husband's heart. Meanwhile, Rachel, who is deeply loved by Jacob, is entirely barren. She cries out to Jacob in deep envy, "Give me children, or else I die." This leads to a surrogate war. Rachel gives her handmaid Bilhah to Jacob to bear children. Leah responds by giving her handmaid Zilpah. It's a messy, painful household of striving, jealousy, and using people as pawns. But eventually the text says, God remembered Rachel, and she conceives and bears Joseph, saying, "The Lord shall add to me another son." After this, Jacob desires to return to his own country. But Laban doesn't want to let his golden goose go, so Jacob orchestrates a complex breeding strategy with peeled rods to build his own flocks of speckled and spotted sheep from Laban's herds, essentially draining Laban's wealth into his own pockets.
It's like an ancient corporate hostile takeover. Jacob grows exceedingly wealthy, and Laban's countenance changes. God tells Jacob it is time to return to the land of his kindred. Jacob gathers his wives, children, and massive flocks and steals away unawares. Laban furiously pursues and overtakes them in Mount Gilead. They have a tense, bitter confrontation, but eventually they make a covenant of peace at Gilead, also called Mizpah, setting up a heap of stones as a witness, essentially signing ancient non-disclosure and non-compete agreements, promising not to pass that boundary for harm.
So Jacob is finally free of his manipulative uncle Laban, but he is marching directly toward his greatest, oldest fear, his brother Esau. In Genesis 32, Jacob sends messengers ahead to Esau in the land of Seir. The messengers return with terrifying news. Esau is coming to meet him, and he has 400 men with him. That's a small army. Jacob is described as greatly afraid and distressed. He divides his people and flocks into two bands, hoping at least one might escape a massacre, and he sends waves upon waves of presents, goats, sheep, camels, cows, donkeys ahead of him to appease his brother's wrath.
Jacob sends his family across the ford Jabbok, and he is left completely alone in the dark. He is entirely out of schemes. And here occurs one of the most mysterious, physically intense encounters in the Bible. A man wrestles with Jacob until the breaking of the day. When the man sees he cannot prevail against Jacob's sheer tenacity, he touches the hollow of Jacob's thigh, instantly putting it out of joint. Yet even injured, in excruciating pain, Jacob clings to his opponent, crying out, "I will not let thee go, except thou bless me."
The man asks him, "What is thy name?" He forces Jacob to admit exactly who he is, Jacob, the deceiver, the supplanter, the grasper. And the man tells him, "Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed." Jacob names the place Peniel, saying he has seen God face to face and his life is preserved. He leaves that encounter at sunrise, walking with a permanent limp.
If we connect this to the listener, look at Jacob. He is a deceiver, a schemer, a man who has spent his entire life manipulating outcomes and grasping for control. But God doesn't choose perfect people. He chooses broken people. He chooses strivers. He chooses those who are willing to wrestle with him in the dark through their fears, their past mistakes, and their inadequacies, and refuse to let go until they receive his blessing. That permanent limp is a physical reminder that Jacob's strength now comes not from his own cunning, but from his dependence on God. And the very next day, when he finally meets Esau, the reunion is surprisingly, miraculously tender. Esau runs to meet him, embraces him, falls on his neck and kisses him, and they both weep. The dreaded massacre becomes a beautiful moment of profound reconciliation.
It's an incredible shift in the narrative, and it perfectly transitions us into the final massive saga of Genesis. The pit, the prison, and the palace, the grand sweeping providence of the Joseph story. We begin in Genesis 37. Jacob is back in the land of Canaan. Joseph is now 17 years old. He's the favored son of Jacob's old age, born to his beloved late wife Rachel. Israel loves him so much he makes him a coat of many colors, an ornate tunic that signals royal favor. As you can imagine, in a family already torn apart by jealousy, this blatant favoritism sparks violent, burning hatred in the hearts of his older half-brothers. They can't even speak peaceably to him.
And Joseph, being a somewhat naive 17-year-old, doesn't do himself any favors when he shares his dreams with them. He dreams they were binding sheaves in the field, and his brother's sheaves stood round about and bowed down in obeisance to his sheaf. Then he has another dream that the sun, the moon, and 11 stars made obeisance to him. Even his father rebukes him for that one because it implies Jacob and his mother would bow to him too. His brother's envy and hatred curdle into a lethal, toxic resentment. The tension boils over when Israel sends Joseph away from the Vale of Hebron to check on his brothers who are feeding the flock miles away in Shechem and later moved to Dothan.
As Joseph approaches Dothan, they see him from afar. Before he even gets near, they conspire to murder him. They look at him and say, "Behold, this dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him, and cast him into some pit, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." Reuben, the oldest, feels a twinge of responsibility and tries to secretly save him by convincing them not to shed blood, but just to throw him into a dry pit in the wilderness, intending to pull him out later and return him to his father. They strip Joseph of his hated coat of many colors and throw him into the empty pit.
Then, in a chilling display of sheer callousness, they sit down to eat a meal right by the pit. As they are eating, ignoring the cries of their brother, a caravan of Ishmaelite and Midianite merchantmen approaches, traveling down toward Egypt with spices. Judah, seeing an opportunity for profit, says, "What profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites." They draw Joseph out of the pit and sell their own flesh and blood into human trafficking for 20 pieces of silver. To cover their tracks, they slaughter a kid of the goats, dip the magnificent Kurt in the blood, and present it to their father. Jacob recognizes it instantly, concludes an evil beast has torn his son to pieces, rends his clothes, and refuses to be comforted, mourning his beloved son is dead.
Meanwhile, Joseph is dragged in chains down to Egypt and sold on the auction block to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. We are in Genesis 39 now, and here we see a theological refrain that anchors this entire section. The Lord was with Joseph. I want to point out the paradox here. The Lord was with him, yet he is a slave in a foreign land. Divine favor in Genesis doesn't equate to a trouble-free life. It often looks like endurance and integrity in the dark. God prospers him even as a slave. Potiphar sees this and makes him overseer of his entire house, putting everything he has into Joseph's hand. But Joseph's integrity is severely tested. He's described as a goodly person and well-favored, and Potiphar's wife casts her eyes upon him, demanding day after day that he sleep with her.
Joseph's refusal is a masterclass in moral clarity. He tells her that his master has trusted him with absolutely everything. Neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? His primary concern is not just betraying Potiphar, though that is real, but sinning against the God who sees him even down in Egypt. But one day, she catches him by his garment. He leaves the garment in her hand and literally flees outside. Furious at being rejected, she uses the garment to falsely accuse him of attempted assault. Potiphar's wrath is kindled, and Joseph is stripped of his position and thrown into the king's prison.
From the pit in Dothan to the palace of Potiphar down into the dungeon. The whiplash of his life is insane. But even there, the text repeats, "But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy." He gains favor with the keeper of the prison, who eventually puts him in charge of all the other prisoners. While there, two of Pharaoh's officers, the chief butler and the chief baker, offend the king and are thrown into the same ward. One night, they both have deeply troubling dreams. Joseph sees their sadness in the morning and says, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you."
The butler describes a vine with 3 branches that buds, blossoms, and produces ripe grapes, which he presses into Pharaoh's cup and hands to the king. Joseph interprets it. The 3 branches are 3 days within which Pharaoh will restore the butler to his position. He pleads with the butler to remember him and mention him to Pharaoh, noting he was stolen from the land of the Hebrews and has done absolutely nothing to deserve this dungeon. The baker, encouraged by the good news, shares his dream. 3 white baskets on his head, the uppermost full of baked meats for Pharaoh, but birds are eating out of the basket. Joseph delivers a grim interpretation. In 3 days, Pharaoh will hang the baker on a tree and the birds will eat his flesh.
And it happens exactly as Joseph said. On the 3rd day, Pharaoh's birthday, he restores the butler and hangs the baker. But the text delivers a crushing blow at the end of chapter 40. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. Can you imagine the despair? 2 full years pass. 2 more years of waiting in the dark, forgotten, wondering if God's promises were just a cruel joke. Until in Genesis 41, Pharaoh himself has a pair of deeply disturbing dreams. He dreams of standing by the river, where 7 fat kine cows come up and feed. Then 7 incredibly lean, ill-favored cows come up and literally eat the 7 fat cows. He wakes up, falls back asleep, and dreams of 7 rank, good ears of corn growing on one stalk, which are then devoured by 7 thin, blasted ears of corn.
Pharaoh's spirit is deeply troubled. He calls all the magicians and wise men of Egypt, but no one can interpret the dreams. It is at this exact moment of national crisis that the chief butler's memory is finally jogged. He tells Pharaoh about the Hebrew youth in the prison. Pharaoh sends for Joseph hastily. They bring him out of the dungeon. He shaves himself, changes his raiment, and stands before the most powerful ruler on earth. Pharaoh says he has heard Joseph can interpret dreams. Joseph's response immediately redirects the glory. "It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace."
Joseph listens to the dreams and declares that they are one and the same. God is showing Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 fat cows and 7 good ears represent 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. The 7 lean cows and thin ears represent 7 years of severe, grievous famine that will follow and entirely consume the land, making the years of plenty completely forgotten. Because the dream was doubled, the thing is established by God and will shortly come to pass. But Joseph doesn't just interpret, he provides a brilliant economic plan. To put it in modern terms, Joseph essentially tells Pharaoh, you need to appoint a national crisis manager. We need to tax the grain at 20% during these next 7 good years and stockpile it in the cities, or this entire country is going to collapse and starve when the famine hits.
Pharaoh recognizes the profound wisdom in this. He asks his servants, Can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? He talks to Joseph, this 30-year-old former slave and forgotten prisoner, and exalts him instantly. He takes his signet ring and puts it on Joseph's hand, arrays him in fine linen, puts a gold chain around his neck, and makes him ride in the second chariot. He gives him absolute administrative authority over Egypt, second only to the throne. During the 7 years of plenty, Joseph gathers corn as the sand of the sea.
And then the famine hits. It's not just in Egypt. The dearth is in all lands. When the surrounding countries are famished, they hear there was corn in Egypt. This brings us right back to the family drama in Canaan. Jacob sees there is corn in Egypt and sends 10 of his sons down to buy food. He keeps the youngest, Benjamin, Rachel's only other son, safely at home, terrified that mischief might befall him as it did Joseph. The 10 brothers arrive in Egypt and they come before the governor of the land. They bow down themselves before him with their faces to the earth.
It is the exact literal fulfillment of the adolescent dreams that sparked their murderous hatred so many decades ago. Joseph recognizes his brothers immediately, but they do not recognize him. He is dressed as an Egyptian nobleman, speaking through an interpreter. And here begins a complex, intensely psychological period of testing. He doesn't just reveal himself, he needs to know if they have changed. Joseph speaks roughly to them, accusing them of being spies sent to see the nakedness of the land. They protest, explaining there are 12 brethren, sons of one man, the youngest is with their father and one is not. Joseph tests their character. He throws them all in prison for 3 days, then releases them, keeping Simeon bound as a hostage. He commands them to take corn back to their starving households, but insists they must bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, back to prove they are true men.
The brothers are absolutely terrified. Right in front of Joseph, not realizing he can understand their Hebrew, they say to one another, "We are verily guilty concerning our brother, and that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us." Their guilt has haunted them for 20 years. Joseph hears this, has to turn himself about from them and weep. He commands their sacks to be filled with corn, but he also secretly orders every man's money to be restored into his sack. When they discover the money on the journey home, their hearts fail them, asking, "What is this that God hath done unto us?" They report everything to Jacob, who is devastated. He refuses to let Benjamin go, saying, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead. If mischief befall him by the way, then shall you bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave."
But the famine is relentless. When the food runs out, Jacob tells them to go again. Judah steps up, solemnly protesting that they cannot see the man's face unless Benjamin is with them. Judah offers himself as surety for the boy, saying, "Of my hand shalt thou require him." Jacob reluctantly relents, sending them back with double money and presents. When Joseph sees Benjamin with them, he orders his steward to bring the men to his house for a feast. The brothers are terrified, thinking they are being brought in to be made bondmen over the returned money. But the steward calms them, and Simeon is brought out to them.
When Joseph comes home, they bow to the earth again. He asks about their father, the old man they spoke of. He looks at his mother's son, Benjamin, and the KJV says his bowels did yearn upon his brother. I love the poetic language of the KJV, but we really have to translate that for people today. It essentially means he was hit with an overwhelming, gut-wrenching, physical wave of emotion and love. He has to literally run out of the room to seek a place to weep. He enters his chamber, cries, washes his face, suppresses his tears, and comes back out. He seats the brothers exactly according to their birthright, from the oldest to the youngest, which marvels them completely, and he sends messes of food to them, but Benjamin's portion is 5 times larger than any of theirs. He is testing them to see if they will be jealous of Benjamin like they were of him.
And they aren't. But Joseph has one final, ultimate test of their character. He commands his steward to fill their sacks with food, put their money back in, and secretly place Joseph's own highly valuable silver divination cup in the sack of the youngest, Benjamin. As soon as the morning is light, the men depart. They are barely out of the city when Joseph sends his steward to overtake them and accuse them of stealing the cup. The brothers are so incredibly confident of their innocence that they declare, "With whomsoever of thy servants it be found, both let him die, and we also will be my lord's bondmen." They take down the sacks. The steward searches, beginning with the eldest, and leaves the youngest for last. And the cup is found in Benjamin's sack.
It's a totally gut-wrenching moment. They rend their clothes, load their donkeys, and return to the city. They fall before Joseph on the ground. Joseph demands, "What deed is this that ye have done?" And here's where we see the absolute profound transformation of Judah. Remember, Judah was one who originally suggested selling Joseph into human trafficking for profit. Now, in Genesis 44, Judah steps forward and delivers one of the most desperate, beautiful, self-sacrificial pleas in all of Scripture. He explains the entire history. He explains that if they return without the lad, their father will literally die of a broken heart. He explains that he became surety for the boy. And then he says, "Now therefore, I pray thee, let thy servant abide instead of the lad a bondman to my Lord, and let the lad go up with his brethren." He offers his own life, his own freedom, to take the punishment, to save Rachel's other son and spare his father's gray hairs from the grave.
Judah's sacrificial offer proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the brothers have fundamentally changed. They will not abandon Benjamin as they abandoned Joseph. And this brings us right back to our hook at the very beginning of this deep dive. Hearing Judah's plea, Joseph can no longer refrain himself. He commands every single Egyptian to leave the room. He is left entirely alone with his brothers, and he weeps so loudly that the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh hear him outside. He looks at them and says, "I am Joseph. Doth my father yet live?" His brothers cannot answer him. They are absolutely terrified, paralyzed at his presence. The brother they betrayed and left for dead is now the Lord of all Egypt, holding their lives in his hands.
But Joseph doesn't exact revenge. He calls them near and speaks the profound theological thesis of the entire book of Genesis. He says in chapter 45, and repeats later in chapter 50, "Now therefore be not grieved nor angry with yourselves that ye sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life. As for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive."
This is the towering meta-narrative of grace and divine providence. Human malice and betrayal were completely real. The brothers truly intended evil, and Joseph truly suffered. But God's sovereign providence is vast enough, brilliant enough, to take the very actions meant for destruction and weave them seamlessly into a master plan of salvation. It is nearly impossible to see the hand of God when you are down in the pit or when you are languishing forgotten in a foreign prison, but Genesis assures us that God is writing a much larger, infinitely more redemptive story than we can see in the moment.
Exactly. Apply this to your own life right now. Are you in a Joseph season of waiting, of feeling betrayed by people you trusted, of suffering in a prison of unjust circumstances? It feels dark and it feels like God has entirely forgotten you. But Joseph's story is a blazing beacon of hope that God is orchestrating events behind the scenes, weaving your pain, your betrayal, and your waiting into something profoundly good, not just for you, but perhaps to position you to be a blessing to others.
This beautifully transitions us into our final segment, Threads of Redemption and Blessings. Joseph commands his brothers to hurry back to Canaan and bring their father, their families, their flocks, and everything they have down to Egypt, promising to nourish them in the fertile land of Goshen for the remaining 5 years of the famine. Pharaoh himself provides wagons and provisions for the journey. When the brothers return to Jacob and tell him Joseph is yet alive and he is governor over all the land of Egypt, Jacob's heart initially faints. He literally cannot believe them. But when he sees the Egyptian wagons Joseph sent, his spirit revives. He says, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die."
The entire family journeys down to Egypt. God speaks to Israel in a vision at Beersheba, telling him not to fear going down to Egypt, promising to make of him a great nation there, and to surely bring him up again. When they arrive in Goshen, Joseph prepares his chariot, meets his father, falls on his neck, and weeps for a good while. Israel says, "Now let me die, since I have seen thy face, because thou art yet alive." Joseph eventually brings his father before Pharaoh. Pharaoh asks his age, and Jacob's response is so brutally honest about the struggle of his journey. "The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been." Jacob blesses Pharaoh and settles in Goshen.
They multiply exceedingly in the land. As Jacob approaches death at the age of 147, he calls his sons together in Genesis 49 to tell them what shall befall them in the last days. He pronounces blessings and prophecies over each of the 12 tribes. But the prophecy over Judah is uniquely monumental, especially considering Judah's transformation. He says, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be." This is a clear, definitive promise that the royal line, the eternal kingship, will flow through Judah until Shiloh, the ultimate peacemaker, the Messiah, arrives.
And as we draw all these massive narratives together, we have to look at the Christ-centered threads woven brilliantly throughout this entire deep dive. We mentioned some earlier, but let's really synthesize them. Jesus is the second Adam, who succeeds in the wilderness where the first Adam failed in the Garden of Eden. He is the seed of the woman from Genesis 3.15, who takes the strike to his heel on the cross to completely crush the head of the serpent. He is the true ark of refuge, providing the only salvation from the floodwaters of divine judgment. He is the ram in the thicket, the ultimate substitute provided by the Father on the mountain, so that we, the children bound for death, might go completely free.
And Jesus is the greater Joseph, Like Joseph, he is the beloved son, deeply favored by his father. Like Joseph, he was rejected by his own brethren, stripped and sold for the price of a slave, 30 pieces of silver for Jesus, 20 for Joseph. Like Joseph, he descended into the pit, the depths of suffering and the grave. But God was with him, and he was raised up to the right hand of supreme power, not over Egypt, but over all creation, offering the true bread of life to a starving world. And ultimately, fulfilling Jacob's prophecy, Jesus is the Lion of the tribe of Judah.
Wow. Let's synthesize the pastoral application for you, the listener. The book of Genesis speaks directly into the absolute messiness of your actual life. It speaks to your pride, warning you through the Tower of Babel that building monuments to yourself and obsessing over your own legacy will only end in confusion. It speaks to your fear, showing you Abraham lying in Egypt, yet proving God remains incredibly faithful even when you panic and try to take control. It speaks to your doubts, reminding you of Sarah laughing at the impossible promise of a child, challenging you with the question, is anything too hard for the Lord?
It speaks to the agony of waiting. Abraham and Sarah waited 25 long years for Isaac. Joseph waited in the dark of a dungeon for years after interpreting the butler's dream, wondering if he had been entirely forgotten. Faith matures in the waiting room of life, and Genesis speaks volumes to the messy reality of family conflicts. From Cain and Abel's fatal jealousy, to Jacob and Esau's bitter rivalry, to the deep, toxic dysfunction of Joseph and his brothers, these were broken, deeply imperfect people. Yet God's redemptive grace worked in and through their fractured relationships. Above all, Genesis reveals the mysterious, quiet sovereignty of God in your suffering. Even when you cannot see his hand, he is active, turning what the enemy meant for evil into profound, life-saving good.
Okay, we are wrapping up this incredible deep dive, and it's fascinating to look at exactly where this book leaves us. The book of Genesis does not end back in the perfection of the Garden of Eden. It ends in Genesis 50 with Joseph taking an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry up my bones from hence. Joseph dies at 110 years old. They embalm him, and the final image of the book is a coffin in Egypt.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought. Genesis leaves us in a state of unresolved anticipation. The grand promises of a promised land and a global blessing have been spoken. The covenant has been cut. But the people of Israel are essentially trapped in a foreign land, in Egypt. It begs you to realize that, like the Israelites dwelling in Goshen, we too are sojourners. We're living in the tension between Eden lost and a promised redemption that is yet to be fully realized. We possess the promises of God, but we live in a broken foreign world. We are waiting for a greater exodus, a final deliverance, when the ultimate seed of the woman returns to make all things new.
That is something to truly mull over and explore on your own. We encourage you to reflect deeply on your own journey through these ancient foundational truths we've unpacked today. Look for the hand of providence in your own life. Trust in the character of the Creator, and remember that even in the darkest pits, the Lord is with you. Thank you for staying with this message until the end. If it helped you, even in a small way, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It truly means a lot to us and helps us continue this work. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, please share it with them. Sometimes one message reaches someone at exactly the right moment. We'd also really value your honest feedback. In the comments, tell us, what are we doing right and what should we improve for future videos? Our mission is simple. Many people never get a clear, thoughtful opportunity to learn about God in a way that feels understandable and accessible. We want to help make that opportunity available to as many people as possible across backgrounds, cultures, and beliefs. Not everyone will connect with every message, and that's okay. But everyone deserves the chance to hear one. If you believe in that mission and want to support it, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you again for being here. We'll see you in the next one.